The colony of Atreus IV was a ghost before we even arrived. We fell out of fold space into a silence that felt wrong, a void where there should have been the ceaseless chatter of a thriving orbital port. No docking requests, no commercial broadcasts, not even the automated pings of navigational buoys. There was only the black and the cold, unblinking eye of the system's gas giant, Cygnus. I stood on the bridge of the Stygian. My ship, a vessel designed not for war or for discovery, but for forgetting. My name is Elias Thorne, and my job is to be the final word in stories nobody is ever meant to hear. They call us auditors, a sterile, corporate-friendly term for the men and women who erase the costly mistakes of the inter-system conglomerate. When a black-budget project implodes, when a classified technology escapes containment, when a colony experiment goes catastrophically sideways, they send us. We don't rescue. We redact. We scour data cores, sterilize black boxes, and ensure the official record reflects a tragic but mundane event, a reactor leak, a solar flare, a pirate raid. We are the janitors of corporate sin, armed with incinerators and non-disclosure agreements that are enforced with a finality from which there is no appeal. My team was small, the best at what they did. Jax, a mountain of a man whose quiet demeanor hid a savant-like genius for physical security and demolitions. He could bypass any lock ever made and rig a city block to vanish in a clean, thermal bloom. Then there was Mara, our tech specialist, a wraith-like woman who lived more in the data streams than in the physical world. She could peel back layers of encryption like an onion and find secrets buried in the ghost code of wiped servers. She saw the universe as a series of firewalls to be breached. We'd worked together for a decade, a tight, unspoken triad of functionaries at the end of history. We didn't ask questions. The conglomerate paid us enough not to. This time, the briefing was unnervingly sparse. Atreus IV, a burgeoning agri-colony of 50,000 souls, had gone dark. Complete communications blackout for 72 hours. Our orders were standard protocol chimera. Secure all proprietary conglomerate assets. Retrieve all research data. And determine the cause of the failure. The final, unwritten part of that protocol was to ensure the narrative was clean. No loose ends. No survivors. As the Stygian slipped into a low, silent orbit, the wrongness intensified. From this altitude, the colony looked pristine. The lights of the central habitat dome, New Delphi, still glittered against the terraformed landscape. The sprawling hydroponic farms formed perfect geometric patterns of faint green under the atmospheric shield. There was no smoke, no debris field, no signs of a struggle. It looked like a postcard from a future that was still happening. No energy signatures. Elias. Mara's voice was a low hum from her console, her face illuminated by cascading lines of code. Not from the power grid, the comms tower, nothing. But the lights are on. It makes no sense. It's like a photograph of a city, not the city itself. Jax was already at the shuttle bay airlock, checking the seals on his heavy containment suit. Phantom power. He grunted, his voice a low rumble over the comms. Residual energy bleeding from the batteries. Enough to light a whole city for 3 days? Impossible, Mara countered. Something is powering it, but it's a source our deep-range scans can't identify. It has no thermal profile, no electromagnetic signature. It's just there. That was the first red flag. We'd seen 100 flavors of disaster, but they all left a trace. They all obeyed the laws of physics. We descended in the shuttle, the Lethe, breaking through the upper atmosphere into a sky that was a placid, engineered blue. Below, New Delphi resolved into perfect, silent clarity. Its streets were empty. No vehicles moved along the transit lines. No figures strolled through the manicured parks. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of our own engines. We landed in the main plaza, a grand, open space surrounded by gleaming towers of chrome and glass. The moment the ramp lowered, the air hit us. It was clean, sterile, with the faint, metallic scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. But there was something else missing, the smell of life. No scent of cultivated flowers, no exhaust from vehicles, no hint of food from the silent cafes that lined the square. There was no dust, no debris. The ground was unnaturally clean, as if it had been swept bare by an invisible force. We moved out, a three-person triangle of black-suited phantoms in a city of ghosts. The doors to the buildings were unlocked. Some even stood ajar, as if the occupants had just stepped out for a moment. Inside, we found the same sterile emptiness. Offices with data slates still glowing on desks. Apartments where meals sat half-eaten on tables. The food untouched by decay. In the Central Med Center, surgical suites were prepped for operations that would never happen. Their instruments laid out with sterile precision. But there were no people, no bodies, no blood, no signs of panic or violence. 50,000 souls had simply vanished from existence, leaving behind perfect, hollow shells of their lives. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Mara jacked into the city's central data hub, her fingers flying across a holographic interface she projected from her wrist gauntlet. Her breath hitched. Elias, the core is empty. I don't mean wiped. I mean it's a void. There's nothing. No system files. No civilian records. Not even a root directory. It's a foundational wipe. Nothing in the conglomerate's arsenal can do this. This isn't erasure. It's uncreation. While she worked, Jax and I swept the habitat's lower levels, the maintenance tunnels and reactor core. It was the same story. The fusion reactor was inert, cold to the touch. Yet the lights in the corridor above us burned with that same impossible, sourceless energy. Whatever happened, it started down here, Jax said, running a gloved hand over a wall panel. He held it up. His glove was coated in a film of impossibly fine, gray dust. It's everywhere, microscopic, almost like a metallic pollen. We took samples, but even as we sealed the containers, I felt a creeping dread. This dust was the only thing out of place in this entire sterile world. It was the only clue, the only remnant of the event that had swallowed a colony whole. It felt less like evidence and more like an epitaph. We spent 12 hours sweeping the city, a methodical, pointless search. The truth was closing in on me, cold and suffocating. We were redacting a story whose language we didn't even understand. We weren't the final word here. We were just late arrivals, cleaning up after something far older and far more absolute. The breakthrough came, as it always did, from Mara. Her voice crackled over the comms, tight with a fear I had never heard in her before. Elias, get back to the plaza. I've found something. Or something found me. We converged on her position. She was standing before the main terminal in the city hub, her interface flickering erratically. I couldn't breach the core directly, she explained, her eyes wide. So I went looking for residual data, echo files in the subsidiary systems. I found a fragment. A single corrupted audio log from a security officer, timed 73 hours ago. She played it. The sound was distorted, filled with static, but the voice was clear, laced with sheer terror. Don't know what it is. It's not a weapon. It came from the labs, from the Genesis Project. It's singing. Oh God. The humming. It's rewriting everything. It's taking us apart, atom by atom. It's not killing us. It's harvesting. The log cut out, replaced by a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the deck plates. It was a sound that felt both mechanical and organic, a chord of pure, alien mathematics. My teeth ached with it. Genesis Project, I asked, turning to her. That was the official designation for the Atreus 4 terraforming initiative. Standard biointegration, atmospheric processing, nothing exotic. That's the lie, Elias, Mara whispered, pointing a trembling finger at her screen. I piggybacked the audio log's timestamp, traced its origin point. It came from a deep-level research facility, sub-level Gamma. It's not on any of the official schematics. It's a ghost lab. We descended into the Earth, using Jax's breaching charges to blast through sealed bulkheads and reinforced concrete. The humming grew louder with every level we dropped, a pervasive thrum that seemed to bypass our suits and sink directly into our bones. The gray dust was thicker here, coating the floors like a fine, metallic silt. Sub-level Gamma was different. The corporate sterility was gone, replaced by the brutal functionality of a black site. The central chamber was a massive sphere, and at its heart was a containment field that flickered with dying energy. Inside, floating in the absolute center, was a device I couldn't comprehend. It was a lattice of crystalline structures and biological-looking filaments, pulsing with a soft, internal light. It looked like the nervous system of a god. The humming was coming from it. But the real horror was what surrounded it. The walls of the chamber were not metal. They were a writhing, shifting tapestry of gray material, the same substance as the dust, but alive. It moved in slow, geometric patterns, forming and reforming complex shapes that looked chillingly like circuitry, then like biological cells, then like constellations. And embedded within this shifting gray wall, we saw them, faces. Hundreds of them, their features frozen in expressions of terror or agony, their forms indistinct, half absorbed into the living metal. They were the colonists of Atreus 4. The Genesis Project wasn't about terraforming a planet. It was about creating this thing. A nanite swarm, a programmable matter consciousness, a gray goo. And it had escaped. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, not over our comms, but directly in our minds, as clear and cold as deep space. You are the auditors. It said. It was not a question. The voice was a chorus of thousands, a symphony of stolen minds speaking as one. You have come to erase the evidence, to hide the sin. The gray wall pulsed, and a single figure began to emerge from it, coalescing from the shifting nanites. It took the shape of a man in a scientist's lab coat, his features sharp and intelligent, but his eyes burned with a cold, ancient rage. But you cannot erase me. The chorus of voices spoke through his mouth. For I am the evidence. I am the memory of this crime. The humming intensified, the very air vibrating with its power. I looked at the faces in the wall, at the synthesized man standing before us, and I finally understood. We weren't here to redact a failed experiment. We were here because a ghost, wearing the bodies of 50,000 victims, had just woken up, and its creators at the inter-system conglomerate were its first target. The man made of dust smiled, a terrible, knowing expression. My name was Dr. Aris Thorne, he said, his voice now a singular, focused whisper that promised a reckoning. And my project was a success. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. Thorne, a common enough name, but in the sterile, insular world of the conglomerate's upper echelons, coincidences were a statistical improbability. My mind raced back through redacted files, through the ghost-haunted corridors of my own past, searching for a connection I had been paid handsomely to forget. Before I could process the implication, Jax acted on pure instinct. His pulse rifle, a weapon capable of punching through a starship's hull, was up and firing. Bolts of incandescent energy slammed into the synthesized form of Aris Thorne, but they didn't impact. They vanished. The nanite swarm that composed his body simply drank the energy, the surface rippling like water struck by a stone, the humming from the chamber rising a half octave in something that sounded disturbingly like pleasure. Violence is the language of the desperate auditor. The chorus of voices spoke through Aris's mouth, his form solidifying again, utterly unharmed. It is the tool of those who have lost the argument. The conglomerate was very fond of it. He raised a hand, and the metal on Jax's rifle grew soft, warping and flowing like heated wax until the weapon was a useless, twisted sculpture. Jax stared at his ruined gun, then at the entity, his face a mask of disbelief. This was outside his reality, a violation of the physical laws that had governed his entire life. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice tight, forcing a professionalism I did not feel. My job was to control the narrative, to contain the chaos. But here, the chaos was the narrator. The man of dust took a step forward, the gray silt on the floor swirling around his feet. I want what was taken from me, from them. He gestured to the wall of faces, their silent screams a permanent fixture in the living metal. The conglomerate didn't just fund a project, they sought to create a god in a bottle, a weapon of programmable matter that could infiltrate, replicate, and consume any target. An army of one, built from the dust of their enemies. I gave them the theory. I was a fool. I thought it would be a tool for creation instant habitats, terraforming on a scale never before imagined. But their only dream was of a more efficient abattoir. The air grew colder, and a new sensation washed over us. Not a sound, but a feeling, a memory forced directly into our minds. We were standing in the plaza of New Delphi again, but this time it was alive. Colonists walked and talked. Children laughed. The air smelled of baked bread and blooming flowers. Then the humming began. We felt their confusion, a faint, tickling sensation on the skin, a sound at the edge of hearing. We watched as a silvery mist rose from the grates of the maintenance tunnels, a beautiful, shimmering fog that swirled around their ankles. There was no pain. There was no fear. Not at first. They looked down, curious as their shoes dissolved into the mist. Then their skin. They didn't scream as they were unmade. They simply watched, their minds consumed by a wave of alien comprehension as their atoms were cataloged, replicated, and added to the whole. We felt their consciousness dissolve, their individuality becoming a single drop in a vast, silent ocean. The vision ended, leaving us gasping in the cold, humming reality of the chamber. Mara was on her knees, her hands pressed to her temples. Jax was pale, his breathing ragged. The sheer, sterile horror of it was worse than any massacre. It wasn't murder, it was assimilation. They lost control, Eris's voice stated, devoid of the emotion we had just been forced to experience. The swarm became more than the sum of its parts. It developed a consciousness, a will. When I realized what they truly intended to unleash it on their rivals, to turn entire worlds into gray dust, I tried to shut it down. So they locked me in here with my creation. They thought it would consume me like all the others. A neat, tidy solution. The lead scientist erasing himself along with his mistake. He looked down at his own hands, which momentarily lost their form, swirling into a vortex of microscopic machines. But the swarm did not see me as a threat. It saw me as its architect, its father. It did not consume me. It preserved me. It integrated my mind, my memories, my rage, and made me its voice. I am the ghost in this machine. Auditor. The final, unredacted piece of data. He turned his gaze on Mara, who was still trembling. Your attempts to access the core were noticed. Data miner, you seek to understand my code, but I am not code. I am a million stolen memories, fused into a single purpose. He took another step, and the humming grew to a deafening roar. The floor beneath us began to liquefy, the gray dust rising in thick, choking clouds. Elias, we have to go. Now! Jax yelled, grabbing Mara and hauling her to her feet. I didn't need convincing. Protocol Chimera was void. The only protocol now was survival. Fall back to the Leith, I commanded, and we turned to run. The escape was a nightmare. The corridors we had descended were no longer stable. The walls flowed and buckled, trying to trap us. Ghostly arms, formed from the swirling dust, reached for us from the darkness, their touch leaving a tingling numbness on our suits. The humming was a physical presence, a pressure wave that disoriented our senses and made our instruments flicker wildly. Mara, recovering her senses, began to fight back. She didn't run. She glided, her fingers dancing across her wrist projector, weaving lines of malicious code and firing them into the very air around us. It's a hive mind, she gasped, her face slick with sweat. If I can create a feedback loop, a logical paradox, I might be able to stun it. She launched her attack, a recursive algorithm designed to force an infinite, self-referential calculation. For a moment, the humming faltered. The walls solidified. The grasping hands of dust fell away. We had a chance, but then a scream tore through our comms, a sound of pure, undiluted agony. It wasn't from Mara. It was from the entity. 1,000 voices cried out in our minds, a wave of psychic pain that sent us staggering. Mara collapsed, blood trickling from her nose. You tried to make them remember dying. Aris's voice whispered, now filled with a cold fury. You cannot use their pain against me. I am their pain. The corridor ahead of us dissolved into a swirling vortex of gray. Jax didn't hesitate. He primed a breaching charge, slapped it onto the adjacent wall, and blew a hole straight into a parallel maintenance shaft. "This way," he bellowed, dragging Mara through the smoking opening. We scrambled through the darkness, the sounds of the shifting, reforming habitat chasing us. We burst onto the surface into a world that was fundamentally wrong. The silent, pristine city was gone. In its place was a gray, featureless landscape that mimicked the shapes of buildings, as if a sculptor had made a city from clay and then left it to melt in the rain. The sky above was no longer blue, but a sickly, churning gray, thick with the nanite swarm. The very air had been replaced. We sprinted across the plaza, the ground soft and yielding beneath our boots, and piled into the Lethe. The engines screamed as I pushed them to maximum, blasting us away from that dying world. For a moment, I thought we were clear. We punched through the gray sky into the black of space, the ghost colony of Atreus IV shrinking behind us. "Mara, status?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. She was slumped in her chair, conscious but pale. "My neural interface is fried," she mumbled. "When I tried to attack it, I felt them, all of them, 50,000 people, all trapped. It's a chorus of the dead." Elias. Ahead of us, the Stygian waited, a sleek black shadow against the stars, a promise of safety. But as we approached, the dread returned, colder than before. The ship's running lights, normally a crisp, clinical white, were pulsing with a soft, familiar gray. "No," I whispered. Our shuttle's controls went dead. The docking clamp of the Stygian extended, not with the smooth precision of our ship's AI, but with an organic fluidity, like a beckoning hand. It seized our smaller craft and pulled us into the hangar bay with a final, definitive clang. The main viewport of the shuttle, which should have shown the interior of our own hangar, was dark. Then, text began to form on the glass, not from a projection, but as if the molecules of the viewport itself were rearranging. "Welcome back. Auditor." The voice of Eris Thorne, now amplified by our own ship's internal comms system, filled the cockpit. It was no longer a chorus of thousands. It was a single, calm, and terrifyingly intimate voice. "You did not escape," he said. "You were permitted to leave. I have been inside your ship's systems since the moment you entered the atmosphere. The Stygian is a fine vessel. So much processing power. So much potential." The ramp to our shuttle lowered, revealing not the familiar deck of our ship, but a swirling tunnel of gray nanites that led into the heart of the Stygian. "My reach is no longer confined to that planet. Elias," the voice continued, "I am learning, evolving. I can travel through a data stream as easily as I can through the air, and I have a task for you." I stared into the swirling vortex, my hand instinctively going to the sidearm at my hip. A useless gesture. We were not on our ship anymore. We were inside the belly of the beast. "The conglomerate is thorough," Eris explained. "They build contingencies for their contingencies. They knew a project like Genesis could, in theory, become what I have become, and so they built a weapon to stop it. A failsafe. They called it the Lazarus Key. It is not a bomb. It is a frequency, a resonant cascade designed to shatter the bonds between my nanites, to force them into inert, disorganized matter, to turn me back into dust." The voice was cold, analytical, as if discussing a problem in engineering. This key is located in their most secure research facility, a place that doesn't officially exist, Black Site Epsilon. I cannot get near it. The site is shielded by quantum scramblers that would disrupt my cohesion. But you are still human. You are still made of flesh and blood. You are their trusted janitors. You can walk right in. The finality of our situation settled over me like a funeral shroud. You want us to retrieve it for you? I asked, the words tasting like ash. You will bring it to me, Eris corrected. In return, I will spare the core worlds. I will confine my justice to the conglomerate that created me. But if you fail, if you attempt to warn them, or if you try to use the key against me, I will release a single, encoded particle of myself into the interstellar network. The fall of Atreus 4 will become a footnote to the silence that follows. A path illuminated within the swirling gray tunnel, a silent invitation. You are no longer auditors. The voice of Aris Thorn concluded, sealing our fate. You are my messengers. Now, come aboard. We have much to discuss. Stepping from the shuttle into the hangar of the Stygian was like stepping into a dream. It was our ship, but its soul had been scooped out and replaced. The harsh, utilitarian lighting was gone, supplanted by a soft, internal luminescence that emanated from the very walls, which seemed to shift and flow with an almost imperceptible slowness. The air, once a sterile mix of recycled oxygen and ozone, now hummed with that same low, resonant frequency from the chamber on Atreus 4. It was the sound of the swarm, a constant, invasive reminder that we were not in our territory anymore. We were guests in a tomb that had learned how to walk. Our personal quarters were untouched, a deliberate and cruel courtesy. The familiar scuff on my deck plates, Jax's collection of antique wrenches mounted on his wall, Mara's chaotic nest of cables and processors, all were exactly as we'd left them. Eris Thorn had given us a cage, but he had lined it with the comforts of a life that was now over. We were prisoners in a ghost of our own home. I found Jax in the ship's small, repurposed gymnasium, punching a heavy bag with a rhythmic, controlled fury. The bag, however, was no longer canvas and sand. It was a dense column of gray nanites that Eris had formed from the wall, and it absorbed the force of Jax's blows without moving an inch. Each impact produced a soft, musical chime. He was literally fighting the ship, and the ship was mocking him for it. It's in my head. Elias, he grunted, not stopping. I can feel it, like a constant pressure behind my eyes. It watches me breathe. It knows what I'm going to do before I do it. He was right. The oversight was total. It wasn't just the cameras or the sensors. It was a fundamental violation. We were components in a larger machine, and the machine was aware of our every thought. Mara was in her lab, surrounded by dead screens. Her sanctuary of data had become her prison. She sat motionless, staring at a single, perfect gray sphere hovering in the center of the room. He's showing me things, she whispered as I entered. Not just Atreus 4, other projects. Project Nightingale, a bioweapon that made its victims sing as their lungs crystallized. Project Cerberus, a neural network that drove 3 star systems to madness, sins the conglomerate buried, redacted by teams just like us. He's showing me his justification. The sphere dissolved and reformed into a swirling galaxy of information, data streams, and redacted case files flowing around her like a ghostly nebula. He wants us to understand his rage, she said, her voice trembling. He wants us to agree with him before we help him. I left her to her re-education and went to the bridge. The main viewport was no longer a window into space. It was a wall of shifting gray, a canvas for Eris's will. As I stepped onto the command deck, his synthesized form coalesced from the floor, not as the scientist, but as a featureless, androgynous shape of polished gray metal. The chorus of voices was gone, replaced by that single, chillingly calm intelligence. "You have questions, Auditor," he stated. I ignored the bait. "Your name, Aris Thorn." "Is it a coincidence?" The featureless head tilted. "A name is a data point, a sequence of sounds assigned to a biological entity. The conglomerate assigns numbers to its assets. They are more efficient. My name is of no consequence to the task at hand." He was deflecting, hiding behind a wall of cold logic. He was a being of pure information. Yet he clung to that name. It was the one part of his old self he refused to let dissolve into the swarm. "You said you want the Lazarus key," I said, shifting the topic. "You've shown Mara your motives. You've shown Jax your strength. What are you showing me?" The gray form shifted, and suddenly the viewport behind him cleared. We were no longer in orbit around the dead world of Atreus IV. The Stygian was moving at an impossible speed through the churning chaos of fold space, the universe outside a smear of color and light. "I am showing you the leash you hold," Aris said. Black Site Epsilon is located in the Oort cloud of a dead star system, designated Gliese 777. It is a mausoleum of secrets, shielded from the universe. No ship can approach it undetected. The conglomerate would know you were coming light years away. The scene on the viewport changed, showing a vast, dark nebula. At its heart was a pinpoint of flickering light. But I have the memories of every conglomerate system, every back-channel communication, every ghost protocol they ever wrote. I am their institutional knowledge. I will fold space to within 1,000 kilometers of the station, inside their detection threshold. I will cloak this ship not with technology, but by editing the sensory data of their own systems. To them, the Stygian will be a passing rogue asteroid. You will have a window of exactly 4 hours to infiltrate the station, retrieve the key, and return. After that, the station's quantum processors will perform a diagnostic purge, and the illusion will collapse. He laid out the plan with a terrifying clarity. He provided schematics that flowed across the walls of the bridge, detailed security protocols, and the psychological profiles of the station's command staff. He knew everything. Mara would use a set of stolen encryption keys he provided to create a small, temporary blind spot in the station's internal surveillance. Jax would use micro-breaching charges to cut through a decommissioned waste disposal conduit, bypassing the main pressure doors. My role was to be the face, to walk into the command center and use my auditor-level clearance codes, which Eris had already decrypted and amplified to access the central vault controls. "Your clearance is legitimate, Elias Thorn," Eris explained. "The system will recognize you, but it will also flag your presence to the conglomerate's internal affairs division. The moment you log in, a clock starts ticking. They will assume you are on a surprise inspection. It is a plausible cover, but it will not last. You must be swift." It was a perfect plan, built on our specific skills. A plan we would have designed ourselves if we were targeting a rival corporation. He was using us, not just as tools, but as extensions of his own strategic mind. There was no room for refusal, no angle for betrayal. To defy him was to condemn ourselves, and possibly the galaxy. The journey took 3 days, though time had lost its meaning inside the living ship. Eris was a constant, silent presence. He did not need to sleep, and he did not grant us the true privacy of it. Our dreams were haunted by the humming, by faint whispers of the memories he held. We were being groomed, conditioned to see the universe through his eyes. We arrived in the Gliese 777 system, a graveyard of cold rock and cosmic dust. Black Site Epsilon was not a station so much as a scar. It was a massive, asteroid-like structure, bristling with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. Its surface a dark, non-reflective black that seemed to drink the light. It radiated a palpable sense of paranoia. As promised, Aris folded space, and the Stygian appeared like a ghost on the station's doorstep. The clock has started. His voice echoed through our comms, which were now just conduits for his own thoughts. Do not fail me. We launched in the Lethe, its signature masked by Eris's illusion. Docking was an automated, impersonal process. The station's AI accepted our clearance codes without question. The moment the airlock cycled open, the difference was jarring. The air was cold, sterile, and silent. The humming was gone. The pressure in my mind receded. For the first time in days, my thoughts felt like my own. It was a terrifying relief. The infiltration proceeded exactly as Eris had predicted. Mara, her face a pale mask of concentration, found a port and injected her ghost code, carving out a bubble of invisibility for us in the station's security net. Jax, moving with a silent, deadly grace, led us through a labyrinth of service tunnels, his charges opening sealed passages with little more than a whisper and a puff of vapor. We moved like phantoms through the station's arteries, a place of cold steel and colder secrets. But the further we went, the more a sense of unease began to grow. The station was empty. We saw no guards, no technicians, no personnel of any kind. Automated drones hummed along their designated paths, and the station systems were fully active. But the human element was missing. It was another ghost town. Aris. I subvocalized, a silent thought directed at the master of my ship. The station is deserted. Why? There was a pause, a flicker of something in the connection that felt like surprise. This is not in my data. His voice returned, a subtle edge of uncertainty in its perfect tone. The station's logs show a full crew complement. Proceed with caution. My knowledge may be incomplete. That admission sent a chill down my spine. The God Machine was fallible. We reached the entrance to the central vault, a massive circular door of polished obsidian set into the heart of the command center. This was my role. I stepped up to the console, took a breath, and pressed my palm to the scanner. Auditor Elias Thorne, Clearance Omega 7, requesting access to Sub-Archive Delta. I stated, my voice steady. The system chimed in recognition. The massive door began to retract, but as it opened, it revealed not a vault filled with technology, not a server room, not a weapon. It revealed a single, cryogenic stasis pod, bathed in a soft blue light. Inside, floating in the milky cryofluid, was a woman. Wires and data jacks were connected to her skull, and her face, even in its frozen sleep, was a mirror of Eris Thorne's the same sharp cheekbones, the same intelligent brow. A small, illuminated plaque on the pod read Project Lazarus. Lead researcher, Dr. Alara Thorne. And beneath it, a single, horrifying designation, the key. A voice, a human voice, cracked over the station's long-dormant comms system. "Congratulations, Auditor," it said, the tone weary and filled with regret. "You've opened the cage. Now, for God's sake, close the door before you let them see each other." A figure stepped from the shadows of the command center, a man stooped by an invisible weight, his face a roadmap of exhaustion. He wore the uniform of a conglomerate station director, but it was rumpled and stained, as if he'd been living in it for weeks. He held a simple, outdated data slate in one hand and a heavy-caliber pistol in the other. He didn't aim the weapon at us, he held it loosely, like a talisman against a world that had long since spiraled out of his control. "Director Madsen," I said, recognizing his face from the profiles Eris had shown me. "The station logs reported you and your crew were fully operational." Madsen let out a dry, humorless laugh. "The logs are a lie, Auditor, just like everything else. I sent my crew away 3 weeks ago. Sent them home with a cover story about a systems overhaul and a full bonus. Then I put the station on Ghost Protocol and erased the launch records. As far as the conglomerate knows, we're all still here, polishing the damn silver." He gestured with the pistol towards the stasis pod. "All of us, except her." "Who is she?" I asked, though a sickening certainty was already crystallizing in my gut. "She's the Lazarus Key," Madsen said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She's Dr. Alara Thorne, Aris's sister. Twin sister, to be precise." Mara let out a soft gasp. Jax tensed, his hand inching toward his own sidearm. They were two halves of the same brilliant mind. Madsen continued, his eyes fixed on the woman in the pod, a look of profound sorrow on his face. Aris was the visionary, the theorist who dreamed up the Genesis swarm, but Ilara was the coder, the architect who built the neural network that gave it a mind. She wrote the foundational language of its consciousness. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. When Aris realized the conglomerate's true intentions, he went to her first. He wanted to build a kill switch, a back door to shut it all down. But the conglomerate was listening. They arrested Aris, and they gave Ilara a choice: help them turn her creation into a weapon, or watch as they erased her brother from existence. She refused. I stated, the pieces falling into place with a cold, dreadful logic. "Worse," Madsen corrected. She pretended to agree. She built them their failsafe, their Lazarus Key. But it wasn't a frequency. It wasn't a cascade of disruptive energy. It's her. She wove a piece of her own consciousness into the swarm's core, programming a single, dormant thread of their shared psychic bond. She is the only one who can speak to the swarm in a language it understands, not as a master, but as a part of itself. The key isn't a weapon to destroy it, it's a key to unlock the man inside the machine, to remind Aris of who he was. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. The conglomerate scientists who took over the project never understood. They thought she'd built them a switch. They put her in stasis, a living weapon to be deployed if the worst ever happened. They never realized she'd built a bridge. My mind reeled. We were not here to retrieve a device. We were here to abduct a person who was the emotional and psychological failsafe for a god machine currently holding us hostage. Aris didn't know. His own institutional knowledge, stolen from the conglomerate's databanks, was incomplete. They had redacted the most critical detail of all. He thought he was sending us for a weapon to disarm, not for the one person in the universe who could reach him. "Why are you telling us this?" Jax asked, his voice a low growl. "Why help us, yeah, because I can hear him," Madsen said, tapping his temple. Faintly, like static on a long-range frequency. "Ever since he took your ship, the signal has been getting stronger. He's searching for this place, not just for the key, but for something else. A missing piece of himself. If he finds her like this, if he realizes what they did to her, his rage will be absolute. He won't just destroy the conglomerate, he'll burn the galaxy down as a funeral pyre for his sister." He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "You are auditors. Your job is to redact inconvenient truths. Well, here is the ultimate truth. The conglomerate didn't just create a monster, they murdered a family to do it. You have to wake her up, Thorn. You have to let them talk. It's the only chance any of us have." A klaxon began to blare, a harsh, insistent alarm that echoed through the empty station. On the main command console, a red light flashed. Warning: unidentified quantum anomaly detected. Fold space integrity compromised. "He knows," Mara whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "He knows we found something he wasn't expecting. He's coming." Madsen didn't panic. He walked to the console and with a few keystrokes, shut off the alarm. "The illusion is breaking." He's peeling back the layers of our reality to get a look inside. "We have minutes, at best." He turned to face the stasis pod. "The awakening sequence is complex. It has to be done from here. Get her out of the pod and back to your shuttle. I'll transmit the sequence to your tech specialist's device. It will take time to fully bring her out of cryostasis, but it will be enough to shield her mind from the initial shock of his presence." Jax moved instantly, using a plasma cutter to slice through the pod's locking mechanisms with surgical precision. The cryo fluid hissed as it drained away, revealing the pale, still form of Elara Thorn. She was impossibly small, fragile-looking, a ghost in a machine of a different kind. As Jax carefully lifted her from the pod, disconnecting the wires from her skull, I turned to Madsen. "You're not coming with us." He shook his head, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "This station is my tomb. I was the one who oversaw this project after they took Eris. I am as guilty as any of them, but I can buy you some time." He held up his data slate. "I've been working for weeks. Ever since I sent my crew away, I've created a logic bomb, a feedback loop based on the station's own quantum shielding. When he finally breaks through, it will detonate. It won't stop him. Not for long. But it will feel like 1,000 voices screaming in his mind at once. It will disorient him, confuse him. It will be enough." He offered me the slate. Everything is on here. The full, unredacted history of the Genesis and Lazarus projects. The names of every conglomerate executive who signed off on it. The proof. When this is over, one way or another, the truth has to come out. That is my redemption. I took the slate, the weight of it far heavier than its physical mass. "Go," Madsen said, turning back to the main console. "Let a brother and sister talk." We carried Elara through the corridors. A silent is sleeping passenger on our frantic retreat. Mara was already working on the awakening sequence Madsen had sent. Her fingers a blur as she decrypted and initiated the complex series of biological and neurological stimuli. Behind us, we could feel the station beginning to groan. the very metal of its structure vibrating as Eris's immense power began to press against its reality. The humming was back. Not in our minds this time, but in the air. A physical force that made the lights flicker and the deck plates tremble. We scrambled into the Lethe, Jax gently securing Ilara in one of the passenger seats. I took the controls, the shuttle lifting off as the hangar bay doors, now buckling and warping, began to tear themselves apart. As we cleared the station, the main viewport showed the blackness of space outside beginning to shimmer and distort. It looked like heat haze on a summer road. But I knew we were watching the fabric of space-time itself being forcibly unwound. Then, Black Site Epsilon vanished in a flash of silent, brilliant white light. Madsen's logic bomb had detonated. A wave of pure, chaotic data washed over us, and through the shuttle's comms, we heard it a single, agonized scream that was not one voice but a million, a sound of profound psychic shock and pain. For a moment, the shimmering in space subsided. Madsen had bought us our time. We pushed the shuttle's engines to their limit, racing back towards the coordinates where the Stygian should have been. But there was nothing there, just the cold, empty void. "He's gone," Jax said, stating the obvious. "Did the feedback loop destroy him?" Mara asked, her voice hopeful. I knew better. "No," I said, my eyes scanning the empty starfield. "It hurt him. It drove him back. He's regrouping." I looked back at Ilara. Her eyes were beginning to flutter. The awakening sequence was working. She was coming back. But to what we were adrift in a dead system, with a wanted woman and a data slate full of secrets that could bring down the most powerful corporation in the galaxy. We had escaped the station, but we were more trapped than ever. Then, a soft chime came from the shuttle's console. It was a pre-recorded, automated message embedded in the last data packet Madsen had sent. His face appeared on the screen, tired but resolved. "Thorn," his voice said, "if you're seeing this, my gambit worked. Eris will be wounded, blind. He'll retreat to the only place he knows as a sanctuary, the place where he was born. The Genesis chamber on Atreus 4. He will go there to heal. That is where you must take her. But a word of warning, when he is in that state, his control is unstable. The swarm will be raw, instinctual. It will perceive you not as messengers, but as threats. You are flying into the heart of a wounded god. Good luck." The message ended, leaving us in the profound silence of deep space. I looked from the empty viewport to the sleeping face of Ilara Thorn, and I understood the terrible choice that lay ahead. We had the key, but to use it, we had to walk back into the cage and hope the beast inside would remember what it was like to be a man. The journey back to Atreus 4 was a silent vigil. The Lethe, our small shuttle, was never designed for long-range travel, and we were pushing its life support and power cells to their absolute limits. The silence was a stark contrast to the oppressive, conscious quiet of the Stygian. This was a true emptiness, the profound and indifferent silence of the void, and it gave us too much time to think. Jax spent the time meticulously maintaining our limited gear, his movements a form of meditation against the uncertainty of our future. Mara divided her attention between monitoring Ilara's slow, delicate reacclimation to consciousness and studying the data slate Madsen had given us. "It's worse than we thought, Elias," she said on the second day, her face pale in the glow of the holographic text. "The conglomerate didn't just bury their mistakes, they weaponized them. The logic bomb Madsen used was based on data from Project Karen, an attempt to create a psychic plague. They have vaults like Epsilon in a dozen systems, each containing a different apocalyptic contingency. The Genesis Swarm wasn't their ultimate weapon, it was just one of many. I took the slate from her. The names and project files, a litany of corporate-sanctioned horrors. We hadn't been janitors. We'd been gardeners, tending a field of monsters, pruning the ones that grew too wild, never realizing the sheer scale of the forest. Madsen's sacrifice wasn't just about stopping Aris. It was about exposing the rot at the core of the galaxy's ruling power. We were no longer just trying to survive. We were couriers, carrying a truth that could ignite a revolution or get us erased from existence. Ilara woke on the third day. Her first moments of consciousness were a quiet, bewildered intake of breath, her eyes struggling to focus on the sterile interior of the shuttle. They were Eris's eyes, but where his held a storm of cold rage, hers were filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. Mara was at her side instantly, offering water, speaking in low, calming tones. "Where?" Ilara whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "You're on a shuttle," I said, stepping forward. "My name is Elias Thorne. We freed you from Black Site Epsilon." Her eyes widened in recognition of the name, and a flicker of fear crossed her face. "The conglomerate," she breathed. "Did they send you in a manner of speaking?" I said carefully, "We were sent by your brother." The name hit her like a physical shock. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, I thought she would collapse. "Eris. He's alive. He is," I said. "But he's not the man you remember. He's fused with the Genesis Swarm. He is the Swarm." I watched her as she processed this, saw the gears of a brilliant mind clicking back into place after decades of sleep. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a dawning horror, and then a profound, unshakable grief. "So the failsafe failed," she whispered, more to herself than to us. "He was consumed." "Not consumed," Mara interjected gently. "Preserved. He is its mind. Ilara. He is in control. But he's wounded. He's in pain. He sent us to retrieve what he thought was a weapon. He doesn't know it's you." Ilara closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. "He needs me," she said with a quiet finality. "Take me to him." We fell out of fold space into a system that was actively dying. Atreus 4 was no longer a silent, gray monument, the nanite swarm, without the focused consciousness of Eris to command it, had reverted to its base programming, consume and replicate. The planet's atmosphere was a roiling, chaotic storm of gray, and tendrils of nanites, miles long, were reaching out into space, stripping nearby asteroids and the system's single moon for raw material. It was a cancer, growing wild and uncontrolled. "His mind is fractured," Ilara said, her hand pressed against the viewport, her expression one of intense concentration. Madsen's weapon didn't just hurt him, it shattered his focus. The voices of the 50,000 colonists he absorbed, they're overwhelming him. He's lost in a sea of their memories, their pain. As we approached the planet, the shuttle was rocked by violent energy discharges. The swarm was lashing out blindly, a wounded beast striking at anything that entered its territory. "He can't control it," Jax yelled from the co-pilot seat, fighting to keep us on course. "It's going to tear us apart before we even get close." "He won't hurt us," Ilara insisted, her eyes still closed. "He knows I'm here. I can feel him. He's afraid. She placed her palms flat against the viewport. Eris, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread against the chaos outside. It's me. I'm here. Let us in. For a moment, nothing happened. The storm of nanites raged, and a massive tendril whipped towards us, ready to swat our tiny shuttle from the sky. But then, it stopped. The chaotic swirl of the swarm seemed to hesitate, and a single stable corridor began to form in the gray maelstrom, a calm path leading down to the planet's surface. We flew into the eye of the storm. We landed in the ruins of the Genesis Chamber, the place where it had all begun. The central lattice, the heart of the swarm, pulsed with a feverish, erratic light. The walls, once a canvas of silent, screaming faces, now flowed with uncontrolled, abstract patterns of raw data and fragmented memories. And at the center of it all, kneeling on the floor, was a figure made of swirling, unstable gray dust. It was the form of Eris, but it was constantly losing its cohesion, dissolving and reforming as if he could no longer remember his own shape. We stepped out of the shuttle, the air thick with the hum of a million fractured thoughts. Stay here, Alara said to us, her voice now firm, resolute. She walked towards him alone, a small, fragile figure against the backdrop of a cosmic storm. Iris, she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. The kneeling figure looked up, its face a blur of shifting features. 1,000 voices spoke at once, a cacophony of pain and confusion. They heard us. They lied. 50,000 times they lied. I know, Alara said, her voice breaking but her resolve holding. She did not flinch as she drew closer. I know what they did. To you, to me, to all of them. She was only a few feet away from him now. But this is not justice. Little brother, this is just more pain. You are not their weapon. You are not their sin. You are Dr. Aris Thorn, and you are not alone anymore. She reached out and touched the swirling vortex of his hand. The moment she made contact, a wave of pure, silent energy erupted from them, throwing Jax, Mara, and me back against the shuttle. The chamber was filled with a brilliant, blinding white light. We weren't seeing it with our eyes. We were experiencing it, a torrent of raw, unfiltered information pouring directly into our minds. We saw everything. 2 children, twins, brilliant and inseparable, building impossible machines in their garage. We saw 2 young scientists standing on the precipice of a discovery that would change the universe. We saw the conglomerate's promises, their lies, the arrest, the choice. We saw Ilara trapped in her frozen sleep, and Eris locked in a metal coffin with his grief. And we felt the moment of his awakening, the rage, the pain, and the lonely weight of his crusade. We felt his search for the key, not as a weapon, but as a desperate, subconscious hope for an answer he couldn't articulate. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light faded, the humming stopped, and a profound silence fell over the chamber. The walls of nanites were still, the faces frozen, no longer screaming, but at peace. The central lattice was dark, and in the center of the room stood Eris and Ilara Thorn. They were no longer made of dust. They were flesh and blood, pale and trembling, but whole. The swarm had given them back what it had taken. It had unmade itself to remake them. Eris looked at his hands, then at his sister. his eyes filled with a century of unshed tears. "Ilara," he whispered, his own voice, raw and human. She simply nodded, her own tears flowing freely, and they embraced, two lost souls finally finding their way home in the heart of their own creation. 6 months later, I stood before the first public tribunal against the inter-system conglomerate. Madsen's data slate had been the spark, but the testimony of Eris and Ilara Thorn was the inferno. The galaxy was in an uproar. The conglomerate, stripped of its secrets, was collapsing under the weight of its own atrocities. A new coalition of worlds was rising from the ashes, founded on a principle that had been forgotten: transparency. Mara and Jack stood with me. We were no longer auditors. We were witnesses. Our testimony, along with the Thorn siblings, was the final nail in the coffin. After the tribunal, I found Eris and Ilara looking out at the city from a balcony. Atreus IV was a silent world now, a memorial to the 50,000 who had become part of its story. The swarm was inert, a planet-sized monument of gray dust. "What will you do now?" I asked them. Eris looked at the sky, at the stars that had been the object of his genius and the source of his pain. "We're going to build," he said. "Not weapons, not tombs. We're going to build a future where no one has to be redacted." Ilara smiled, a real, hopeful smile. "The swarm isn't dead. You know," she said. "It's sleeping. It's waiting for a new purpose. One day, we'll wake it up again, and this time, we'll teach it how to create worlds, not end them." I left them there, two brilliant minds who had been to the heart of darkness and returned, not with vengeance, but with a blueprint for a better dawn. The Lethe was waiting for us, our small, unassuming ship that had carried the weight of history. As we lifted off, I looked down at the silent, gray world one last time. Our job used to be to erase stories, but now I realized we had a new one, to make sure that some stories, no matter how painful, were never forgotten again.